Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, January 31st, last day of January, 2019. Okay, we do have that. It's time to move on from worrying about whether or not we're saying the right year. It's the end of January, and it's cold. I don't know if it's cold where you are. I suppose if you're up live listening, it is. If you are up live listening and you're on the West Coast, well, sorry to hear it. Good morning, Justice. You are. I know. I don't know how cold it is out there on the West Coast. I guess you're spared from this, or maybe you're not. I don't know. Maybe the northern part of the West Coast. You never get the news there because you guys start so late. And I am up and raring to go, just like I was a coffee company CEO who thought he should be president or something like that. There's a lot to catch up on today. Not a great deal of earth-shattering news between yesterday and today, but lots to catch up on, and at least one pretty good article that I probably will need to share with you on an emergency basis very shortly, probably in the second half of the show. Actually, Justice says not too bad, right? Weather report currently, and it's early in the morning. There's this what we're at now, low to mid 30s, which is not bad for like 2 a.m. or whatever. I know it's not 2 a.m., but it's early in the morning, and it's not, is it light? No, I guess it's not. Upper 50s later, that sounds good. We get that weather in a little while, I guess. I don't know if it's the same air mass or not, but as you know, we should be watching your weather, pardon me, because you, of course, get it before we do. Things move from left to right, weather-wise, in this country. For the most part, except if you're all the way on the East Coast and you get those crazy storms that come in from off the ocean. The bad stuff comes in from the right. Anyway, like next week around here, we're expecting temperatures in the low 60s in the midweek. And then, of course, in the midweek when you can't really have time off to enjoy it. By the time the weekend comes back around, although this weekend is supposed to be relatively warm, it dips back down. You don't need to know that. That's not really what you're here for. Traffic is next, though. We also have, of course, a raft O stories floating on or sliding on top of the ice. It's not even a floating raft from Greg Dworkin, who will be skating down from Connecticut later on, provided Skype hasn't frozen the internet. And the internet does freeze from time to time. That doesn't have much to do with the temperature. Mostly has to do with the ancient laptops on which I try and access it. At any rate, lots going on. The president is awake and tweeting this morning, and that's important, and everybody ought to know that. And I'm not certain he makes any particular sense today, but he rarely does. Daily Coast Radio, though, is live. And Bill is with us this morning. Welcome back again, Bill. It's good to see you again. Kagro X is the best broadcaster of the past 50 years, in part because he never takes his jacket off due to his respect for the studio. This is true. The studio is so cold. They should keep the Oval Office cold, and then no one would take their jacket off, whether they respect the office or not. I don't know if you happen to catch that one, that reference. I don't see how you could have avoided it, because Howard Schultz said it. The guy we don't want to talk about anymore said, I don't know. Well, two things. He was asked, one, on television, who is the best, or I don't know how the question was phrased, but his most admired, or his idea of the best Democratic president of the last 50 years. I think this was on TV yesterday on Morning Joe. And his answer was FDR, who, of course, hasn't been president in the last 50 years, hasn't even been anything in the last 50 years, because going back 50 years, he was dead for 24 or 25 of those years prior to the 50-year mark. So he shouldn't have counted. And it might have been interesting to call him on that, but, we may have learned all we needed to know about him, about his answer to that question, given the fact that he, had no idea that, he had been asked about the last 50 years or so. And it was meant to be a difficult question, because there aren't that many Democratic presidents over the last 50 years. There are a few to choose from, and, Carter and Clinton and Obama. And take your pick. Now, that's only choosing from three, and the fact that he chose somebody who wasn't one of those three, and of course he didn't really give much in the way of reasons for it. He then went on, I guess, was it in the same question? At some point he states that he had great admiration for Ronald Reagan because he never took his jacket off in the Oval Office due to his respect for the office, and that's not even true. So I'm not really certain how that gets in people's heads, but I don't know. Weirdos do say it from time to time. Pundits and otherwise, people running for president, people who wanted to criticize Obama for wearing a tan suit or wearing jeans at one point in the Oval Office or sitting on the Resolute desk, on the corner of the Resolute desk, all of which Ronald Reagan also did. And it only took about an hour for people to start circulating collections of photos of Ronald Reagan jacketless in the Oval Office. I've already seen the pictures when they were criticizing him, Obama, for wearing jeans, pictures of Reagan in jeans. He was a horseback rider. Of course he liked wearing jeans. And I think we even came up with a picture or two of him sitting on the corner of the Resolute desk as well. It's sort of a thing that people do with furniture, and it's not that unusual. But anyway, that happened yesterday, and we have to deal with it. E.J. Dionne is spending his column on Howard Schultz, and it's amazing. Between the time and effort people are spending on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Howard Schultz, I don't know. Like you'd think we didn't have a giant lumbering dotard in the White House who was a danger to himself and the entire planet. And I don't know. I'm glad for the attention on somebody else, I guess, in a certain way. I'm tired of having to pay attention to this idiot in the White House, but you can't take your eye off of him. That's unwise. All right, let me bring Greg in. Good morning, Greg. This crackling sounds of a frozen Skype here. How are you this morning?
There was a tremendous number of cracks happening last night as the deck outside the house met -3-degree weather.
Yeah, a lot of groaning.
Yeah. You don't get frost quakes after the ground is frozen. You get them when you get this sudden freeze. So we had that last week. I thought I heard maybe one crack yesterday that might have been the ground, but I think mostly it was just the deck. Okay. But boy, it can be really loud.
It makes a lot of noise.
Makes a lot of noise. Get your attention. Here. And then you remind yourself, gee, it's really cold out. And you look at the thermometer. -3 is what we hit this morning. It's now a balmy 1 degrees above zero, so we're very happy about that.
Yeah, so it's
and then it warms up.
Be above. Yeah, that's sort of the way the cycle works. The sun rises. It's very hot, the sun, and we're not that far from it. And eventually we warm up a little bit. We'll turn around later on. And face the other way.
Will the world end in fire or in ice? You don't really know. So let's talk about Howard Schultz a little bit, not from the perspective of what kind of candidate he is. He's a lousy candidate. He doesn't even vote half the time. And that's information from Seattle. That's not a throwaway line. It's actually true. But I think the thing about Howard Schultz is that it's kind of a Rorschach. It's kind of a mirror. You hold up Howard Schultz and you start talking about what do you want in a presidential candidate? What do you see in one? What does this tell you about the parties? And what does it tell you about Donald Trump? And the reason that we're not talking about Trump, as you were just finishing your intro with, is because he's not that interesting anymore. Everybody's kind of sick of him. They want to move on. And that's why they're talking about Howard Schultz.
I guess that is very helpful in the sense of this is how easy it is to sort of to distract ourselves. It's human nature. I wouldn't be embarrassed about it, but yeah, I mean, I guess everybody thought maybe as love him or hate him, Donald Trump had figured out there was a certain genius to his ability to direct our attention, and really all it is somebody with their fly down is on TV, and we're all watching it, and somebody else is coming. Now his pants are down too, and that's funny too.
If you've ever been on the highway and seen somebody at the side of the road and slowed down to see what was going on, you know exactly what's happening here.
I guess so. I don't.
The presidency right now is a train wreck.
Yes.
So how do you not stop and rubberneck?
I don't know. And you've got a long We've got a lot of opportunities to do it. It's a very long train. You can stop at any point and view the wreckage from wherever you find investment.
Whatever angle, you could see it, and people are interested in that. So I'm going to give you two pieces here.
Yes, I'll take them.
One of them.
See them. Okay.
I hear talking in the background. It might be my computer that I hear it. I hope you don't hear it.
I don't.
But this is good. This is Matt Bai's Political World, and he's talking on Yahoo, and he is discussing.
I do hear something now.
How about now? Okay, I was taken a little aback this week by the level of outrage. Can you hear?
No, now I'm done. God has stopped talking to me.
Okay. I was taken a little aback this week by the level of outrage and vitriol spewed at Howard Schultz.
That son of a bitch. All right. Yeah.
The 65-year-old billionaire who built Starbucks into a global brand after he said he was considering a self-funded independent campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And he was taken aback because he's never met Howard Schultz.
Okay.
But he thinks Schultz saw where the culture was headed, that people weren't connecting, and he put Starbucks out there, and now everybody meets for coffee. And so if he's not going to be a spoiler, and if he has that kind of vision, why shouldn't he run?
Who is this?
This is Matt Bai.
Really? That's really surprising. Okay.
Yeah. But, of course, I think he misses a bunch of important points. One of them is brought up by David K. Johnston, who's writing, "Spit out Schultz's shallow candidacy. His bromide-filled campaign will only help elect Donald Trump." And that's more of the, generic view on that.
Okay.
But, what's fascinating about all of this is that it's brought out the centrists.
Oh, good. They're always hiding.
And say, this is really interesting because what I have here is, a whole view of where the parties are and where they should be. And, it's obvious to me that the Democratic Party isn't doing what I want and the Republican Party isn't doing what I want. So we must have this mythical good person running. And why is everybody so mad about Howard Schultz?
I don't know. It's the Howard.
And the answer is because he's not that person.
Oh.
All
right.
But why are you so opposed to the Democratic Party? Why do you insist that whatever people suggest is so far left that you must therefore, as a responsible centrist, offer another point of view? I mean, that's the Michael Bloomberg way of looking at the world.
Yes.
That's the Howard Schultz way of looking at the world. And it's fascinating because, of course, none of it is true. And just to make that point, Howard Schultz, as we talked about the other day, said his impetus for running was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as if she's his opponent,
yes,
which is not true. But let me bring your attention to this NBC News report here.
The next one.
Progressive pollster finds majority support for Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax.
Okay.
She has a plan to impose a wealth tax on fortunes larger than $50 million. And it enjoys net support across party lines, according to a new poll by a progressive analytics firm. Data for Progress, a research group that's been testing opinion on a variety of left-leaning policy proposals, commissioned an online survey of Warren's plan through pollster YouGov Blue. The survey of 1,282 registered voters said, would you support or oppose imposing a 2% tax on the assets of those with a net worth of over $50 million and a 3% tax on the assets of those with a net worth of over $1 billion? 61% of respondents said they supported the proposal, and 46% strongly supported, 21% opposed, and 15% doing so strongly, and the rest were unsure.
Strong. Good.
It includes a plurality of Republicans, 44-37.
All right.
Strong. Independents supported it 61-23. Democrats went for it 76-6. Okay. Earlier this week, a poll by the Hill Harris X on a proposal by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to tax income over $10 million with a 70% rate, that is to say marginal rate, that over $10 million gets taxed, not anything under, found strong support across party lines as well. That survey found 59% of registered voters supported the proposal, including a substantial proportion of Republicans who opposed it by just 55-45. So it's not like these proposals are unanimous. But looking at poll numbers like this, one can make the case that it's really inappropriate to talk about Elizabeth Warren or AOC as being far left when, in fact, they represent the center mainstream part of the country. And if you call yourself a centrist, why aren't you supporting these very popular proposals, which apparently the center of the country thinks is a great idea?
I don't know, except, well, I think we do know.
We do know because it's my money and you're taxing me, and that's the reason I'm running. And so that really exposes the whole hypocrisy of Schultz's entire campaign, and that's why I think he's not going anywhere.
Well, that's, I think, what a lot of
So Matt Biden, they talk about the fact that this guy has his finger on the pulse of where the moment is and knows how to read the room. Of
course.
And then you see him on TV and thinking, that's a bunch of crap.
Yeah, the guy knows I mean, quite frankly, the premise is ridiculous. I'm surprised at Matt Bai. Not that I am a huge Matt Bai fan or anything like that, but I mean, have a finger on the pulse of the nation. People like coffee. You know what I should do? I should sell coffee. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Not just sell coffee, but make little places where people can go and meet.
Yeah.
That has free Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's definitely a nice thing.
Your place doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really, having the finger on the pulse of the nation. I love Wi-Fi. I'm a huge consumer of Wi-Fi. I don't currently drink coffee, but coffee is nice, and I used to drink a lot more of it.
There. Maybe I'll buy one and let it sit on the table while I use the Wi-Fi. But
I just have never said, you know where I gotta go. So I mean, I'm not in touch with the pulse of the nation. People do like to go and do this. It's true, but I don't see how that's. I mean, it's like, okay, that's not. I would nominate you for, Mr. Rogers, or you want to have a morning talk show. That would be great. Nuclear missiles,
If you stole all the oxygen and then opened up these little cafes that had free oxygen, I'll bet there'd be a lot of fan base regular customers.
Yes, probably true. Or if you were the only provider of oxygen on Mars, like Cohagen and his crew. I don't know why I thought about that. But, yeah, it's not that he's doing anything that's interesting to America's political life. It's that, like somebody has the pulse on their finger on the pulse of America. Everybody wanted a blanket you could wear as pajamas and a fish that you could hang on the wall and press the button and it would sing, "Take Me to the River." But none of those people are running for president.
Right.
I don't know.
I love this. It's a very short piece from NBC News, but I like this quote.
It's just dumb.
We polled Warren's exact proposal, and it's overwhelmingly popular, even among Republicans, Data for Progress founder Sean McElwee said in an email. And then there's the quote I like. It's time for centrists to embrace bipartisan solutions that can unite all Americans, and expropriating the wealth of billionaires is a great place to start.
Yeah, I think
that's where centrists should be. And claiming that, we have to do this. We're forced to it because we're centrists and we have to save the country from the far left, which is apparently so popular that it's actually arguably the center of the country. So that must make me a right-wing libertarian. I'll just disguise it by calling myself a bipartisan independent centrist or whatever I call myself.
All right. Well, centering yourself is always a valuable self-help technique, and I guess you shouldn't just don't get carried away and carry it over into politics and think that everybody is where you are because you are where you are.
Right. Jeff Stein from the Washington Post tweets, "Tax the Rich sweepstakes scoop. Senator Bernie Sanders will later today introduce a big new estate tax plan on the top 0.2%, including a 77% rate on billionaires." What
a great idea.
Same week, Mitch McConnell moved to eliminate estate tax outright.
Okay.
Mitch McConnell's also moving to eliminate voting, but, that's another story.
Oh, yes, right. So our centrists are for only 50% of you are allowed to vote.
Right, but here's the thing, all right?
Yes.
Democrats are either correct that the center of the country thinks it's a really good idea to tax the rich, or they're completely wrong, and Howard Schultz is right, and people will flock to his banner. And I suspect it's the former and not the latter. Bernie Sanders may not have the best plan. He may have the most interesting plan. But various and sundry people are talking about how to tax the very wealthy because of income inequality. And it's a thing. And apparently, according to the polls, it's a very popular stance for the Democratic Party to take. Okay. So I'm not so worried about them being labeled as out-of-touch leftists because, in fact, they're exactly where the center of the country is. Now, the other thing
okay, yes.
that comes up, of course, which is a big hot topic, we talked about it yesterday, we'll be talking about it a lot, is the whole thing about Medicare for All.
Oh, yeah.
And which of the various 8 versions of that are you really talking about? And are you talking about it in a voluntary sense or a mandatory sense? And are you talking about it in terms of incremental public option and then get your way there eventually? Or are you talking about eliminating all of the private insurance companies? All of that's going to be topic for discussion. And rather than Dems in disarray, which is the popular way for the media to, portray these kind of discussions, it's actually a rich and healthy policy discussion. And why are we having it? Because we're sick of talking about Donald Trump. We want to talk about policy and how it affects our lives.
Yes.
And again, I don't think the Democratic Party is wrong to be in the center of that. So if people like Howard Schultz are going to look at that and say, well, that proves that the Democrats are leftists, they want people to have health care, and they think income inequality is an important thing for the 99% who aren't the super rich. How dare they? I'm going to recapture the center. I think the Democratic Party probably has it right, and he has it wrong.
Well, I tend to think so. I don't know. I'm not certain what drives him other than the fact that he's a billionaire and his life for a long time has been about, when I wake up, people should snap to attention and do the things that I have in my head, because that's a vision. When you're rich, what's in your head is a vision. When you're not rich, what's in your head is either a distraction or ADHD.
We say that all the time, right? If you're poor, you're crazy, but if you're rich, you're eccentric.
Right. Yeah. Exactly right. And this is just recasting it in a slightly different light for a different context. It's true.
Or as my late great aunt used to tell us, when a pigeon would poop on the windshield, she'd say, "For the rich, they sing."
That's pretty good. All right. We'll pocket that one.
So, this whole discussion, I just think it's a really healthy discussion in terms of where the country is at. And the funny part of it, I think, is the out-of-touch consultants and rich guys who have the smallest group of supporters explaining to the rest of us how we're all out of touch.
Yes, that is something of it's an entertaining thing to watch if it wasn't so serious.
But there you put your finger on it. You wonder how come people are paying so much attention to Howard Schultz, and the answer is because it's entertaining.
Yeah, and I think you know what? Here's the pulse of the country. I think everybody enjoys the coffee, but they realize it's ridiculous, and they would like to take a shot for fun at the guy who talked them into paying $5 for coffee. They are enjoying the coffee. They like to slow down, relax, have a fancy coffee, whatever. But at the same time, I think they know it's ridiculous and they resent it, and it bothers them that $5 at a time. He's a billionaire and I'm not, and all I have is this 5 minutes with the coffee, and now he wants to force his way into the rest of my life. I think this is annoying.
So Iowa starting line. Pat Reiner put together a very helpful little chart here, which I sent you. Okay. And it's the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates, who's in, who's out, and where they stand, at least as far as his list goes. It's kind of useful.
Okay.
And in for the Democratic presidential candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, John Delaney.
Okay.
Julian Castro.
Yes, him I know.
Pete Buttigieg?
Yeah.
That's how we pronounce it.
I think I heard someone say it was like boot edge. They spelled it out. Buttigieg.
Yeah, well.
Edge.
I am reminded of the great Broadway show Fiorello.
You remind me
there was
of
a song there in the show.
Yes.
About trying to figure out who the party was going to put up to lose. And you need some schlub. You got to pick somebody.
Yes.
And
okay, you've told us.
The song goes. The lyrics are something along the lines of Mike is out. I'm afraid he just wouldn't sell. Nobody likes a candidate whose name they can't spell. so they take him off the list, and they have to ultimately come up with Fiorello LaGuardia, who goes on to win. Which they were totally unexpecting. Yes. Now they're unhappy because LaGuardia owes them nothing. But that's the show. Yeah. The concept is still good. Buttigieg, or however it's pronounced, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, we'll get it. He seems like a decent guy.
Tulsi Gabbard's next on the list.
I can pronounce it. Don't
probably
like her.
not. Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang.
And Marianne Williamson.
I just heard about her candidacy the other day. I don't know who she is, but she's a writer.
She's Oprah Winfrey's spiritual advisor.
Really? You're not kidding?
Yeah.
That's not a
I'm
joke?
Oh. No.
All right.
All right. So they're in.
Okay.
All right. I think that John Delaney, Andrew Yang, and Marianne Williamson will probably not succeed.
Enjoy Iowa, guys.
But they are in.
All right.
Yeah, especially in winter. Okay. Yeah. And then that list is definitely Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, and John Hickenlooper.
Oh, those are definites? Okay. Why is that not just in?
I don't know. Probablys. Joe Biden, Sherrod Brown, Jay Inslee, Beto O'Rourke, Michael Bloomberg, and Eric Swalwell. I don't think Bloomberg's going to be in. I think Bloomberg, there's a big story about Bloomberg putting his money into voter and data registration, and he's already trying to give Howard Schultz a message that there's not a lot of room for millionaires and billionaires in this particular environment.
Billionaire fight. Let's have it. Okay.
So I would love it, by the way, if Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg and Howard Schultz got together and pooled their money and did a lot of voter and data registration stuff, and fought for people for the kind of election reform we just saw in New York.
That would be a great idea. It would be with all that money, you could probably figure out where the pulse of America actually is, as opposed to just declaring where it is. But
you can go to Starbucks and listen.
That's true. You could just go there and listen to other people, as opposed to dictating terms. That's interesting. All right. Well, we'll be right back after a brief break. There's more to cover, I am sure, and you probably don't really want to go outside. So
we're going to talk Nancy Pelosi.
Excellent. We'll do that next. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you. But remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us. Just a little bit of catch-up during the break. I know we want to move on to Nancy Pelosi, but we literally had to look up Andrew Yang since you read the name out, and it rang no bells. And so interesting guy, but I was afraid of another billionaire in the race when I typed in Andrew Yang, and the first suggestion beyond Andrew Yang that came up on Google was Andrew Yang net worth, so I was a little worried. And he is a venture capitalist, entrepreneur type guy. And
his platform is giving everybody $1,000 a month if you're between 18 and 64.
That's different. But yeah, not just of his own personal money, but a universal basic income platform, which is worthy of discussion for sure.
Right.
And finally, a billionaire who wants to give his money away. Well, not his, but somebody.
So he's in the in category. The probablys were Joe Biden et al. The maybes, according to Pat Reiner, were Jeff Merkley, Amy Klobuchar, my dark horse, Steve Bullock, Eric Holder, Terry McAuliffe, Tim Ryan, Mitch Landrieu, Seth Moulton, and Adam Schiff. So Tim Ryan and Seth Moulton figure that, listen, if you can't run and win for speaker, you might as well just skip it and go ahead and run for president.
Yeah, what jobs are open? I'll take that one.
And the way that they conducted the campaign to be speaker gives you an idea of just how talented they are and how well they'll do if they run for president.
Yeah, another name I don't recognize, Steve Bullock.
Governor.
Oh, where?
Oh, one of those states
I'll educate myself. All right. Yeah.
One of the states
good you
that John
recognize
knows
them.
about.
Okay. Yeah, I'll ask.
That area of the country.
Okay. Well, I'm going to
And
look
then
it up.
the out list is important too. It's Tom
Oh, yes.
Steyer, Martin
Montana.
O'Malley, Deval Patrick, Jason Kander, Michael Avenatti, Richard
I don't know
Ojeda,
him either.
and Eric Garcetti, the mayor of L.A. after settling the L.A. teacher strike, announced he wasn't running.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
And the import of that may be that in the end, the actual number of people running may be a lot less than you thought.
That's usually the case. Yeah. And there's lots of names always floating around. Steve Bullock is the governor of Montana. There was nobody there to tell me he was the governor.
Right.
They were all out at the time. It's on my answering machine.
It was out there with Jonas.
Yes. Well she's in Oakland at the moment, so that's not even right. But okay, I get your meaning. She won't take all of that either. Okay.
Anyway.
Montana.
But they did run against Nancy Pelosi. I found this fascinating article here.
Yes.
From one of my favorite political scientists named Dave Hopkins. And he wrote a piece called Why Pelosi Gets More Attention Than Schumer for Taking on Trump. Everybody gives Nancy Pelosi credit for grinding him into the dust.
Yeah.
And, there's some pretty obvious reasons for that. I mean, it's fun to contrast him losing to a girl, and I say that advisedly.
Yes. Okay.
A very talented and accomplished woman like Nancy Pelosi. But calling her a girl doesn't diminish her; it diminishes him.
I see.
But in any case, obviously she has incredible talents. She's very good at what she does. We talked about this a lot. We talked about it a lot during the so-called Pelosi rebellion that didn't come to anything. Mm-hmm. But the other side of the coin is that Chuck Schumer, who actually has done a lot to oppose Trump, gets zero credit. Don't forget, it was Schumer who got Trump to say on TV, "It's my shutdown."
Yes, that's it. He was the one speaking to him when he blurted that out. Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr.
Right.
Go ahead.
I mean,
say it. Go ahead. Right. In President Trump's decision last Friday to sign a temporary continuing resolution that reopened the government for 3 weeks, thus ending the longest federal shutdown in American history. The most popular interpretation of this development, widely held in all but the most pro-Trump corners of the conservative media, and I can name names, by the way, was that Trump had conceded defeat in a one-on-one battle of wills with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Okay. Pelosi, by most accounts, had personally outmaneuvered, outwitted, and simply out-toughed the president. The resulting headlines tell the story clearly enough. How Nancy Pelosi ended Donald Trump's shutdown by Ezra Klein. She's not one to bluff. How Pelosi won the shutdown battle, Politico. How Nancy Pelosi used her smarts and strength to absolutely dominate Donald Trump. That's kind of kinky. By columnist Elizabeth Drew. This Pelosi-centered frame prevailed even though the precipitating legislative maneuver that preceded Trump's concession occurred in the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? Last Thursday, Mitch McConnell introduced a Trump-backed proposal that included billions in funding for a border wall. It received only one Democratic vote from Joe Manchin and lost 2 votes from arch-conservative Republicans. McConnell then allowed consideration of a Democratic alternative, which attracted a higher level of support by combining a unanimous vote from Democrats with 6 defecting Republicans. It was clear at that point that momentum had turned against the White House. According to a report from Axios, it was only after Chuck Schumer told McConnell that Trump's idea for a down payment on the wall funding was a non-starter among Senate Democrats that Trump was convinced to drop his demands and reopen the government. I will add that's because Jared Kushner was whispering in his ear that I can make deals with the Democrats.
Yes.
They talked to me. Look what I did on prison reform.
Yeah, right.
So I can do this like I'm bringing peace to the Middle East.
Which he's also finished.
Well, yeah. Anyway. So Trump had to be told by McConnell that Schumer said no deal. Schumer had previously goaded Trump into taking responsibility for the shutdown during a December meeting in the Oval Office that Trump had abruptly opened to the press. Throughout the entire process, Schumer and Pelosi seem to have worked in close collaboration to oppose the White House and congressional Republicans, even appearing together to deliver the response to Trump's national address on January 8th. Yet, The same media stories that featured blaring headlines crediting Pelosi for besting Trump relegated Schumer's role to brief passages in the bottom paragraphs when they mentioned him at all. Why have the two Democratic leaders received such different coverage in both quantity and quality during and after the shutdown? Here are 3 reasons for this pattern.
Okay.
One, of course, personal reputation.
All right.
Pelosi had plenty of support before, and Schumer was viewed by liberals as much more of a squish.
That's true. He is viewed
This
that way.
distinction is not unjustified. He agrees with you. It reflects the differing institutional constraints of the two Democrats as much as their personal instincts. The procedural complexity of the Senate requires its leaders to be more transactional than the majoritarian House, and Schumer's need to defend 10 members of his caucus running for re-election in Trump-carried states during the 2018 session of Congress constrained his ability to lead the public opposition to the president, in contrast to Pelosi, who was freer to play offense. But it also meant that media analysts and partisans on both sides were likely to view the shutdown resolution as a victory for the supposedly tougher and more principled Pelosi, regardless of the true nature of events. Note the January 15th headline from the satirical Onion, Chuck Schumer honestly pretty amazed he hasn't caved yet.
Yes.
But, he has a point. Hopkins is talking about the institutional dictations of the different chambers and how they are, in fact, different. And I just found myself nodding along with all of that. Everything you've taught me about how the House works versus the Senate works, they're not the same thing, and you can't treat them with the same expectations. It doesn't work that way.
Right. No, that is true. I find number 2 a little bit more persuasive, but he's absolutely right. Certainly right about their personal reputations and the differences between the way the two houses work. I still don't. I don't think
that happens on the show all the time. So I was just nodding along and saying, "Yeah, that makes sense."
Yes, doesn't make the case for me in terms of. I think there's much more about why Chuck Schumer doesn't get as much attention, but there are 2 more points to get to. So,
right, job title. Put simply, Pelosi's a leader of majority, the most powerful legislator in her chamber, and Schumer isn't.
Right.
Right. I mean, he's the minority leader. What do you expect him to do? He doesn't have the votes.
Yeah.
We saw that with the other shutdown over DACA. Schumer couldn't sustain it. They don't have enough votes to pass what they want.
Right. I mean, that's
the third one is gender. Nancy Pelosi has been a highly skilled and effective legislative leader for 16 years, including a very productive previous tenure as Speaker between 2007 and 2010. It's hardly a coincidence that after almost 2 decades in power, she's achieved a newfound status as a national feminist icon at a time when the opposing president is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. You can say the same for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, even though many of the other justices vote with her.
Right.
But she's the notorious RBG. Even for the mainstream press, the idea of anti-Trump forces being led by a woman is simply too good a storyline not to adopt as the dominant frame of the current partisan divide in Washington. Journalists are especially interested to know what Trump thinks of Pelosi, a curiosity that does not extend equally to Schumer or many other Democrats. And since gender's on everybody's mind, more than usual these days, if, say, Patty Murray were serving as the Senate minority leader rather than Schumer, it's very likely the events of the past several weeks would have been framed as Trump versus 2 women or Trump is bested by 2 women rather than Trump versus Pelosi. So at a time when journalists and citizens alike are even more inclined than usual to view politics in terms of the personalities and identities of individuals rather than larger structural or institutional factors, it's worth remembering that the stories we're told are sometimes the stories we're in the mood to hear.
Okay.
That's true. Pelosi is a much more interesting thing to do than talking about Chuck Schumer and his roots.
That is true.
Where he came from, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, very true. I put more emphasis myself on the second point, which is the one we spent the least amount of time on. Even if Chuck Schumer were majority leader of the Senate, we don't think of it this way, but the Speaker of the House is a constitutional officer, and the majority leader of the Senate is not. She's in line to succeed to the presidency, and he isn't. And it's a higher ranking spot. That's who gets the credit, typically.
It's the People's House.
Yeah. So I put a lot of emphasis on that one, but I think all these points are largely correct. So I guess if you put 3 points together that are largely correct, that makes a good article, a good find. Correct?
Yeah, it was a good article, and I thought it brought up some really important things to emphasize about the differences between the Senate and House, because there's going to be plenty of times Chuck Schumer will disappoint us. And sometimes, it's not always up to him. And just as we talk about the fact that Mitch McConnell's main job isn't to help the country do anything. It's to help reelect his group of senators there.
Yes. Right. I guess also think back, if you've been around long enough and watching politics long enough and been around Daily Kos long enough, think about the way Harry Reid has gone out as the big hero, but think way back, if you can, to the times we were frequently disappointed in Harry Reid. And Harry Reid is folding about this, and why won't he do that? And why does he hate progressives so much? And we had plenty of gripes about Harry Reid at the time, and he went out on a high note. That's good. But that's the role of the Senate leadership. It's not that easy, and you don't stand out there in front of a whole huge number of troops the way the speaker does.
Right. So the public right now in polling is actually giving Pelosi more credit than Trump for being a leader and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And that's obviously good stuff and information that the Democratic Party can and will and should use. But part of that is the narrative that the media tells, and so we like to fill in the rest of the story, not just what the media tells you.
Yes. All right.
All right. While this is going on, I'm going to give you my quote of the day. It happens to be from Tom Nichols.
Tom Nichols.
Radio Free Tom, writing in USA Today.
Huh.
He says, NATO opponents are like the anti-vaccine movement. They see no need for something that's kept them safe in ways they do not understand.
All right. Oh, where's
so
that?
Get your flu shot and try to get your Trump shot, too, while you're at it.
Yeah, I guess so. Wow.
He's talking about the fact that Trump and his Republican minions are playing with nuclear fire on NATO. Ooh. And I think that's fascinating because there's a whole bunch of articles, I guess, because Mitch McConnell is allowing a bill to come up in the Senate today about slowing down the Syrian withdrawal.
Ah, okay.
And the point is that on many different – and we had the Intel committee hearings that were televised yesterday, and basically the intelligence community doesn't agree with Trump on, if I can remember them all, because there's a lot.
Anything.
They don't agree with Trump on Iran. They don't agree with Trump on Korea. They don't agree with Trump on Russia. And they don't agree with Trump on Syria.
Right. How are they on the which Latin American country are we having problems with at the moment? Venezuela.
Venezuela, I don't recall where they stood on that. But the point is that between that yesterday and the vote today, Republicans are finding their backbone and willing to break with Trump on an issue, that issue being foreign policy.
Okay.
It's got to start somewhere. So if you're looking for cracks in the whatever Trump says Republicans do, those cracks are starting with foreign policy. Let's see if it actually spreads to domestic policy.
Okay.
See if we have some
I'll take it.
Frost quakes there.
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah, I mean, that was quite a spectacle, and people have spent a lot of time trying to explain that away, Republicans, trying to explain that away in the last 18 hours or so. We'll see how long. So a vote today, eh? Okay. See how that goes.
Again, when McConnell allows stuff like that, that is his signal. How the vote goes, you can never say, but the fact that he allows the votes and comes up with some excuse for why I allowed this and why I didn't allow that. For example, he's not going to allow federal workers to vote on a national voting holiday because it's a Democratic power grab.
Yes. That was pretty astonishing.
Right? When people vote, it's a Democratic power grab. That's because people like to vote for Democrats.
It could be.
So therefore, it's his job to prevent that from happening. On the other hand, if Republicans want to send Trump a message that they're not happy with him on foreign policy, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I guess so. That sits well with him. I mean, ultimately, it's another good lesson in the way the Senate works. Why does one get a vote and one doesn't? That's what Mitch McConnell likes, and the other one isn't. But he doesn't want to say it that way. It makes him center himself too much. We used to, anyway, shy away from that in politics. It's very hot now. I don't know why he doesn't want to adopt it, but he's old school and wants to pretend that there's a rule-based reason for doing it or a logical reason for doing it this way. Okay.
Now, my last piece that I'm going to talk about before I go and let you have your show back is this interesting piece that Marcy Wheeler, Empty Wheel, had on the disinformation campaign targeting Robert Mueller.
Yes. Thank you.
And that whole story itself is interesting. I haven't fully wrapped my head around exactly what's going on there.
Yeah, we'll try and help.
But it does seem like, remember that mysterious company that was suing over whether or not they had to give documents over to Robert Mueller.
Right,
it does seem like that is, in fact, going to turn out to be a Russian company of some kind.
Okay.
Rosneft or whatever the big utility company was my bet. We don't know that. But in addition to that, there was some other issue that came up where Mueller was negotiating with some lawyers representing Russian interests. And in the process of discovery, Mueller gave them some things that were not crucial to stay hidden, and somehow or other found its way out to the internet. So that information was used to try to discredit Mueller prior to this midterm election.
Yeah.
So Empty Will's column is about that, but she has this thing buried in here, which I just thought was fascinating. And that is that Dan Coates yesterday during the hearings was talking about Russian election tampering with the Select Committee on Intelligence. SSCI, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. That's what that stands for, right?
Yeah.
And she writes, I find this interesting because of a disturbing exchange in a very disturbing global threats hearing the other day. This just being an example of that kind of global threat.
Well, all global threats hearings are disturbing, yes.
After getting both Director of National Intelligence, DNI, Dan Coates, and FBI Director Christopher Wray to offer excuses for White House decisions given to give security risks like Jared Kushner security clearance.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Right?
Right.
Martin Heinrich then asked Coates why ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I'm guessing about some of these acronyms. I just, not that familiar with them.
Yes, I think that's probably right.
Had not shared the report on election tampering even with the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Okay.
Right? And Chairman Richard Burr interrupts to say that, in fact, he and Vice Chair Mark Warner have seen the report. What he actually said, Burr says, before you respond, let me just acknowledge to the members that the Vice Chairman and I have both been briefed on the report, which isn't the same thing as seeing the report.
Right.
And it's my understanding that the report at some point will be available. And then Coates goes into some deadline issues. You have 45 days and then another 45 days to check before we go ahead to assess whether there was anything that resulted in the change of the vote or anything with machines. And then we have 45 days to look at it and this, that, and we're waiting for that final information to come in, yada, yada, a bunch of hand-waving. And after Coates dodges his question about sharing the report with the committee, Heinrich then turns to Richard Burr, the head of the committee, to figure out when they're going to get the information. And Heinrich says, so the rest of us can look forward to getting the report? And Coates said, I think we'll be informing the chairman and the vice chair of their decisions. And Heinrich said, that's not what I asked. Will the rest of the committee have access to that report, Mr. Chairman, directing this to Burr? Burr says, well, let me say to members, we're sort of in uncharted ground, but I make the same commitment I always do, that anything that the vice chairman and myself are exposed to will make every request to open the aperture so that all members will be able to read, I think, what's vitally important. But we're not to the point where we've been denied or not to the point in negotiations need to start on that yet. So it's my hope that once the final 45-day window is up, that it's a report that will be made available probably to members only.
All right.
You get all of that? So Heinrich
of.
is saying, when do we see the damn report? And Burr says, well, we'll have to see. It all depends upon, we have to ask, then they have to say they can't give it to us for 45 days. And then after that, hopefully we'll get it, and then maybe we'll let you see it too. So they've not seen any of this stuff. Most of the Senate Intelligence Committee has not seen the information and data that the intelligence community is collecting on how Russians are interfering with elections.
Okay.
We haven't seen it.
No,
they haven't
not even on that committee, right?
Not even on that committee. I just thought it was astounding. It's cute in terms of how the process is supposed to work. A reminder that the chair and the vice chair see stuff that other people don't. A reminder that Devin Nunes and his role of misleading the House Intelligence Committee was a complete disaster. Yeah. But none of the members get access to the stuff that they're most complaining about. So if you want to know how come there haven't been actions taken by the House and the Senate on things like this, is because they don't know what things they're even talking about here.
All right. Well, keep that in mind when you. Everybody needs to have it in mind when asked about whether or not they absolutely must wait for XYZ report before discussing XYZ topic, i.e., impeachment. Be aware that these are games that you can play, and if you publicly commit yourself to something as concrete as I won't consider impeachment until I see the Mueller report, be aware that one day it may come to pass that you don't exactly ever really see the Mueller report. Or
in 45 days we'll decide, and then we'll take another 45 days, and then we'll decide, and then maybe you get,
until it's
a whole bunch of stuff like that.
Right. Take it off the table because election's coming again. The 2-year window is not that long. And it's very easy to fall into now we're in an election year, and the old Biden rule, no impeachments in an election year. What? That's not a rule. I don't. The guy said it had a name and everything. And Biden, everyone knows who he is. It's Democratic name. You must have made up this rule. And then suddenly the press is telling you that's true. We've never considered impeaching a president in an election year. And by God, we have not. And we should have been, and we didn't. But it's not because we decided it wasn't allowable. It's just we don't consider impeaching presidents that often. And,
right, but
3 out of 4
when you talk about
years
impeaching the president, don't you want the information to clearly prove that it's something that you should do? Well, you don't have that information because they're denying it to you.
Right.
And Marcy points out at the end of the article that the intelligence authorization did not mandate that report that Heinrich was trying to get his hands on about Russians interfering with the election. Mm-hmm. Trump staved that requirement off with an executive order.
Wow.
So it makes it look like an attempt to avoid admitting to Congress that your buddy Putin continues to tamper in U.S. elections.
No. Sort of thing that would be impeachable in its own right.
That you would think.
Yes.
So new House, this is Senate, new House and new rules, and we'll see how they take to being denied information now.
Yes.
It's just interesting because, remember, the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, unlike the House, was the one that was thought to be bipartisan and functioning better.
Yeah.
This is better. They can't get their hands on information they feel like they need.
Right.
Because the administration's stonewalling.
Now, they will eventually get the information. The question is it soon enough, and how is it disseminated? For instance, I guess you ought to keep in mind that the leadership of the committee, particularly on the House side, but also to some extent in the Senate side, maintaining your spot as chair or vice chair when you have access to information and your members don't, and they want it, and you have it in your head anyway, even if you can't show them the papers, sharing it to at least a limited extent such that they become satisfied that they understand what's going on is integral to remaining at the head of that committee. Yeah. Deprive your members and lord it over them that you know this information and refuse to share it with them, and people will start talking about replacing you.
Well, let's just say that this is a process that takes time to play out.
Okay.
And none of this is fast. And so, again,
That's
for people wondering, well, okay, they took over the House. How come they haven't started impeachment proceedings yet?
Yes.
If you're in data collection mode, this is how long it takes to collect data.
Yeah, and then even when you're done collecting it, it still takes 45 days to decide whether or not you're going to give it to anybody.
Mm. So again, worth mentioning process for people who think that Congress moves too slow. It does, but it really does. It's not people making it up. That's Though
it's definitely exploitable.
Yep. All right. With that, you got 5 minutes to summarize this hour, and then you get a whole next hour all to yourself because I'm leaving you.
All right.
I'll be back Monday.
About
this is great work. And speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning, it'll be warmer when I come back because it's pretty darn cold today.
Yes. Well, you know how it is with us in the sun. Okay. Mm-hmm. I appreciate it, Greg.
Take care.
Thank you. You do the same. Stay warm if that's possible. And we move on to, we may stick with this topic, though perhaps we would take a different angle on it here somewhere along the line. Let's see. This is... Yeah, how do I want to deal with this? Okay, well, maybe we'll spend the next couple of minutes parsing through this empty wheels explanation. Or maybe I should back up, perhaps, and say I'll pick up on some of the articles that I've got that try to help explain exactly what went on with the Mueller documents. I've found a couple of different articles. I think we'll stay at home, so to speak, and pick up Mark Sumner's summary of what happened over at Daily Kos. Russia pretended to hack its own court documents and altered them, and Mueller caught them. That's really the key part of what went on here. That it's actually kind of difficult to follow at a distance. It's not entirely obvious what happened here. Let me give you Mark's summary of it. Concord Management and Consulting, the indicted Russian company, and he puts that in scare quotes, company, and that's important. That'll come into play in the second hour here when we share a different article. That provided funding for the Russian effort to weaponize social media. So we heard all about them in the Internet Research Agency, etc. But this is Concord Management and Consulting. Sounds American, apparently Russian. Maybe it's a company, maybe it isn't. It provided funding for the Russian effort to weaponize social media, leaked information from non-public court documents to undercut the case being made by the special counsel's office. To release the information, the Russian company created yet another fake company, Redstone Hacking, which honestly, if you're trying to hide your hacking, is a terrible name for your company. But that's what they called it, which claimed to have, quote, hacked Russian server with info from the Russian troll case, unquote. It sounds like that's part of another conversation somewhere. But in fact, Concord was just releasing its own copy of court documents, but not without making a few changes. This is a little bit confusing here. And I was wondering, I was confused even last night in reading about Concord Management and Consulting. Never heard of them. Indicted Russian company. Is this the secret company that we couldn't hear anything about? Is it not Rosneft, but in fact Concord Management and Consulting? But because I guess the name has been blurted out, we have to assume no, they wouldn't just blurt out the name after going through such pains to keep it secret, right? Must be a different company we've never heard of. All right, well, we'll get a paragraph or two in here before our 1-minute break. In February of 2018, the special counsel indicted 13 Russian individuals associated with Concord Management. I remember that, but not Concord. And the collection of Russian operatives masquerading as a company called the Internet Research Agency. Now we understand why company is in scare quotes. Okay, so that's the setting. The IRA, or Internet Research Agency, was the core of Russia's social media effort to support Donald Trump. This is what we remember. This sets the stage. That's not the entirety of the paragraph. We'll come back and bring you the rest. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's get some of these pop-up ads out of the way and head back to, it wasn't on, the pop-up ads were not on Daily Kos. Thankfully, we're relatively free of pop-up ads, I think. I mean, things do pop up from time to time, but nothing blocks the entire screen like I just experienced over at, where was I? The Seattle Times. That'll teach you, Seattle Times. Now you've been criticized on a podcast. Probably never lived that down. All right, so we were explaining the Concord Management and Consulting situation. Concord Management and Consulting, a pseudo company of sorts based over, Russian-based, like the Internet Research Agency. Not really a thing, not a company as we understand the word here in the United States, although it's kind of coming to be how we understand corporations here in the United States. Again, I think alluding to something that I think we can clear up with a totally different article later on in the show. But let's continue with this one. The IRA, the Internet Research Agency, everyone thinks of other things with IRA. The core of Russia's social media effort to support Donald Trump. They're the ones who generated the fake sites for not just groups, and that in scare quotes too, that supported Trump, but also the sites that weaponized American racism. Fake Black Lives Matter sites intended to frighten white voters in critical areas were being created by the same people making fake Hillary hates blacks sites that were intended to suppress African American votes. Similarly, the Russian agency played non-existent extremes on both sides of immigration, of gun safety, and of every issue that could be used to lever open a gap among American voters. The militant messages at Blacktivist came from the Russians. So did the xenophobic rants at Secured Borders. Those two things being the names of sites, I guess, and groups, corresponding groups that were created at the Internet Research Agency. The workers at the IRA created dozens of Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, I would imagine hundreds, web pages, and a network of connections among them. Then they created thousands of bots, each of which had its own set of accounts and provided apparent heft and popularity to the core accounts. I think we all understand how this work. But if you're new, actually, this is a pretty good and succinct explanation of how you do this stuff, mechanically speaking. They even sent actual Russian agents to actual American cities to stage actual protests. On Twitter alone, the IRA created 3,800 known accounts and sent 176,000 tweets that were seen by millions of Americans. Some of those tweets were retweeted by such conservative Trump supporters as Ann Coulter. Who would thunk it, right? Some of them were retweeted by members of Trump's campaign, like Michael Flynn, who was an idiot and a spy. The YouTube videos the IRA created also got broad notice on the right. So did their GIF memes. And when they had trouble getting an idea to break through organically, the Russians did it the old-fashioned way. They bought ads. All of it as part of the effort to help Donald Trump. At least 90 people worked full-time at this effort, and that doesn't include the over 100 Americans that they either recruited or attempted to recruit. On Wednesday, the special counsel's office made a new court filing opposing the publication of some documents related to the Concord case. And as CNN reports, the filing reveals that Concord management has already been busy conducting its own document release against court orders. Because what does a Russian company care about American court orders, right? And the Russians have been making changes to the documents they release, because what would the Russians care about American rules about the integrity of documents, or, international understandings of the integrity of documents as well. The new filing states that certain non-sensitive discovery materials in the defense's possession appear to have been altered and then disseminated as part of a disinformation campaign aimed, apparently, at discrediting ongoing investigations into Russian interference in the U.S. political system. CNN and BBC reporter Josh Russell was one of several people who received information from a new Twitter account under the name of Redstone Hacking. Remember that terrible name for a hacking company? What is a hacking company even? I don't know. Redstone claimed to have special access to court documents obtained by hacking into a Russian server with information on the case against Concord and the Internet Research Agency. But it now appears that Redstone was Concord, quote-unquote, hacking its own documents to leak out selections, which had been altered at that. Exactly what Concord Management / Internet Research Agency / Redstone Hacking altered in the documents that they released isn't clear, because for the most part, the documents they produced were still not available to the public. So you can't compare them side by side and figure out what got changed, or the entirety of what got changed. But it's clear that some things were changed. So these are documents that I guess the special counsel's office handed over to the defendant Concord Management, as part of its case against them. And you disclose, each side has to disclose to one another what evidence they have, and something that would indicate what will come up at trial and how it'll be used. And so you can prepare your defense or your prosecution, for that matter, adequately and lay the facts out. And we don't have to spend time, the court isn't very good at prying out those facts yourself. But in order to be able to lay the two sides out openly on the table and allow the finder of fact to figure out something close to what happened here, that's what our discovery process is. So the special counsel's office in prosecuting Concord Management says, here's what we have about you that we intend to use against you. They took those documents, and ordinarily it's not something you want to release to the public, but they took the documents and then they altered them. They photoshopped them, essentially, so that they said something other than what the special counsel's office says it really knows about Concord management. In other words, what they could have done, and I'm not entirely certain that this is exactly the case, but they could have taken a charging document that says, we know all about you guys. We know all about you Concord management guys. We got you caught dead to rights, red-handed, interfering in the election in 2016 because we caught you doing this, this, and this. And if you take that, not really letterhead, but you take that template, that the appearance of which indicates that it's an official document coming from the special counsel's office, and give it the same look and use a lot of the same language and same text, but change some portion of the text such that it reads, let's say, for instance, all right, we'll be honest with you guys. I'm going to show you what we have on you. We know all about you, and we know what you've been doing, and we know that you didn't really do anything to interfere in the election, but it's in our political interest here in the United States to portray you as having done these things so that we can use it as leverage against Donald Trump. And you printed that out and said, look what we found, what we hacked. It's not Concord management saying, look, these guys have no case against us. This is what they gave us, and showing us the documents. It's a third party that hacked into somebody's servers and found, reluctantly, against the will of Concord management, these charging documents, or whatever it is, discovery documents that they got from the special counsel's office. And because they are just hackers who want to free the information, man, they're putting it out there, and maybe they have a political interest in it. Maybe they don't. Who knows, right? But they're just pretending to have found these things on some server in Russia somewhere. And the truth is exposed now. This is what Mueller is up to. They're rigging up a prosecution against defendants that they know had nothing to do with anything, and that maybe nothing at all actually happened anyway. And isn't it amazing that they would have the gumption to do this sort of thing? But you know how corrupt those Americans are, particularly those American Democrats like Robert Mueller, the Republican. And that's essentially what they've been doing, is releasing faked up documents made to look like they're the genuine article from the special counsel's office that say something other than what they really said. And for the best of my understanding, it was intended to be understood by people believing this ruse, that there wasn't anything serious going on in the investigation and that they ought to drop it. All right, let's see. So that's the story we've got, and the explanation of it we've got from Mark. We should probably take a second look back then at what Marcy was saying about this campaign, the disinformation campaign. Armando has a request in to discuss something about Mueller as well. We'll take him up on that request in a few minutes. And I also want to fill in some additional information here by way of understanding what's going on. We'll see if we can get to all of that. Let's take a look back at Marcy's article just briefly here. The disinformation campaign targeting Mueller and the delayed briefing to SSCI on Russian election interference. A lot of people, she says, are reporting and misreporting details from this Mueller filing, revealing that it had been the target of disinformation efforts starting in October. What's this? So I don't know what this is exactly grabbed from. Our link is to Document Cloud. So I guess this is I don't know. I'm not certain the provenance of this source. Let's read it and see if we can figure it out. 1,000 non-sensitive files leaked along with the file structure Mueller provided with it. To substantiate an argument that Concord management should not be able to share with Yevgeny Prigozhin the sensitive discovery that the government has shared with their trollish lawyers, Mueller revealed that on October 22nd, someone posted 1,000 files turned over in Discovery along with a bunch of other crap, partially nested within the file structure of the files turned over in Discovery. On October 22nd, 2018, the newly created Twitter account Hacking Redstone published the following tweet. We've got access to the special counsel Mueller's probe database as we hacked Russian server with info from the Russian troll case Concord LLC versus Mueller. You can view all the files Mueller had about the IRA and Russian collusion. Enjoy the reading, it says, and it's footnoted that on that same date, a reporter contacted the special counsel's office to advise that the reporter had received a direct message on Twitter from an individual who stated that they had received discovery material by hacking into a Russian legal company that had obtained discovery materials from Reed Smith. The individual further stated that he or she was able to view and download the files from the Russian legal company's database through a remote server. By the way, you should note that out there in right-wing American troll land, Jacob Wohl, the guy who was trying to who was that the guy who held the press conference alleging that Mueller had some sexual misconduct situation and they had a woman willing to testify to that and she never showed up and the whole thing fell apart. He's now taken this story that a reporter was contacted by the alleged hacking group to say, hey, we will share with you the information, the documents that we hacked out of this server, even though they didn't hack anything out. They just took the Concord documents that Mueller gave them, altered them, and pretended they stole them. But you're a reporter. We want you to see this so that you report it in the American press so that the disinformation is then planted in the American press. And the reporter said, hey, that sounds suspicious. I'm going to call the FBI and Mueller's office and say, I got this message. This sounds weird and suspect, and maybe you ought to be aware of this situation. A hacker in Russia says they've hacked a Russian legal company's server and found documents that you prepared and gave over to a defendant and which should not have been released publicly. Do you want to look into this? Jacob Wohl is out there telling people, this is proof that Mueller is in cahoots with the press, that the American Lugan press, as they love to borrow that term, the fake news American media is directly in contact with Mueller about framing up charges against Russian hackers. It's, of course, nothing of the sort, but that's what they're doing with it. All right. So there was this tweet to a reporter. The tweet also included a link to a web page located on an online file sharing portal. This web page contained file folders with names and folder structures that are unique to the names and structures of materials, including tracking numbers assigned by the special counsel's office, produced by the government in discovery in their case. This is also footnoted. For example, the file sharing website contains a folder labeled 001-W773. Within that folder was a folder labeled Yahoo. Within that folder was a folder labeled Return. Within the Return folder were several folders with the names of email addresses. In discovery in this case, the government produced a zip file named Yahoo 773. Within that zip file were search warrant returns, for Yahoo email accounts. The names of the email accounts contained in that zip file were identical to the names of the email address folders within the return subfolder on the web page. In other words, they just lifted it directly out of the zip file from the government. The web page contained numerous other examples of similarities between the structure of the discovery and the names and structures of the file folders on the web page. The file names and structure of the material produced by the government in discovery are not a matter of public record. At the same time, some folders contained within the Redstone hacking release have naming conventions that do not appear in the government's discovery production, but appear to have been applied in the course of uploading the government's production. For example, the 001-W773 folder appears within a folder labeled REL001, which is not a folder found within the government's production. The naming convention of folder REL001 suggests that the contents of the folder came from a production managed on Relativity, R-E-L, Relativity, a software platform for managing document review. Neither the special counsel's office nor the U.S. Attorney's Office used Relativity to produce discovery in the case. So this is their own software that these Russians are using to extract the information and sort through the documents. So continuing, the FBI's initial review of over 300,000 files from this website has found that the unique hashtag values of over 1,000 files on the website matched the hashtag values of files produced in discovery. This is footnoted too, but the footnote is not included here, so I guess it's not quite as relevant. Furthermore, the FBI's ongoing review has found no evidence that the U.S. government servers, including servers used by the special counsel's office, fell victim to any computer intrusion involving the discovery files. Had to have happened somewhere else, in other words. It sounds like Mueller's office found out about it when being contacted by the journalist who had been alerted to the content on Twitter. But before Mueller asked Concord's trollish lawyers about it, the defense attorneys, citing media contacts they themselves had received, contacted prosecutors to offer a BS excuse about where the files came from. On October 23, 2018, the day after the tweet quoted above, defense counsel contacted the government to advise that defense counsel had received media inquiries from journalists claiming that they had been offered hacked discovery materials from our case. Can you believe it? Of course, they were the hackers telling people this. Defense counsel advised that the vendor hired by the defense reported no unauthorized access to their non-sensitive discovery files. Defense counsel concluded, I think it's a scam peddling the stuff that was hacked and dumped many years ago by Schultz, referencing a purported hack of Concord's computer systems that occurred in approximately 2014. That hypothesis is not consistent with the fact that actual discovery materials from this case existed on the site, and that many of the file names and file structures on the web page reflected file names and file structures from the discovery production in this case. Without any hint of accusation against the defense attorneys, though this motion is accompanied by an ex parte one, so that's one we will not have seen yet, who really knows if they offered further explanation there. Mueller notes any sharing of this information for disinformation purposes would obviously violate the protective order in this case. And they go on to argue, as stated previously, these facts establish a use of the non-sensitive discovery in this case in a manner inconsistent with the terms of the protective order. The order states that discovery may be used by defense counsel solely in connection with the defense of this criminal case and for no other purpose. This, of course, is another purpose. And in connection with no other proceeding and without further order of this court, and that authorized persons shall not copy or reproduce the materials except in order to provide copies of the materials for use in connection with this case by defense counsel and authorized persons, etc., etc. But essentially, they have gone ahead, of course, and misused this. Now, another section that claims the Mueller disinformation was part of a month-long election season campaign. This thread, quoted herein from one of the journalists who was offered the information, put it all in context back on November 7th, the day after the election. And there's a screenshot here that doesn't tell me a great deal about what's going on. Let's just go on with the narrative, if we can get back to that. The thread shows how the release of the Mueller-related files was part of a month-long effort to seed a claim, S-E-E-D, seed a claim that the Internet Research Agency had succeeded in affecting the election. And there's a linked story which Marcy says in NBC News that provides more background. Given how the Mueller disinformation functioned as part of that month-long election-oriented campaign, I'm more interested in this passage from the Mueller investigation than that the investigation had been targeted. Mueller argues that they shouldn't have to share the sensitive discovery with Yevgeny Prigozhin because the sensitive discovery mentions uncharged individuals who are still trying to screw with our elections. Very interesting claim as well. Let me see. How much further does this go on? It very actually ends up pretty briefly before going into what happened at the SSCI meeting. Let's see. How much further do we need to go with this one? At this point, I think Marcy starts to get into details that we might perhaps explore differently. And with, she's gone so far into the backgrounding on this and in her blog that it makes it difficult to just share one piece over the radio and make sense of it. We'll invite Armando to call in if you like anytime now, even though it's only about 5 minutes to the break, but we can begin to set things up. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll begin sharing this other article that I've been talking about for a little while, and we can begin on the discussion of this. But I think this will help clear up not specifically necessarily this Concord management case and exactly what they've been up to, but a lot of difficulties in interpretation of what's going on in Russia. And this one's made a lot of sense to me. It's not exactly where we've been sitting on the question of Russia and what they're up to. And it's also not exactly, although it's not meant to apply to this, but it does, exactly how we've been thinking of Saud-owned Arabia and why I won't call it just Saudi Arabia. And so take a look at this. Masha Gessen has written this piece for The New Yorker, The Trump-Russia Investigation and the Mafia State. This comports also with something we read probably about a week ago on the crossover between the mafia, the mobbed up state, essentially. We've hinted at this, and we've hinted at the fact that Russia just simply has a different kind of governmental structure that blurs the line between officialdom and outright criminality. And we've hinted the same thing about Saud-owned Arabia too. It's easier to understand, I guess, perhaps, even though neither one is really very easy to understand for Americans. But I don't know why we have such difficulty with it. We have this terrible conceit of ourselves as being a law and order country, I guess. But let me just dive right into it here. It puts it this way. Masha Green puts things this way. It's been a strange 2.5 years. From the first allegations in July of 2016 of Russian meddling in the U.S. election campaign to the arrest of President Donald Trump's former advisor Roger Stone last week. Many of us who write about Russia professionally or who are Russian have struggled to square what we know with the emerging narrative. And here, this may even help make sense of the ideas some Americans have in their heads about in which they presume that the entire Trump-Russia story is absurd on its face, and there's just nothing Russians aren't really doing the things we say that they're doing. And that was difficult for me to swallow in the beginning too, right? And I think this helps make some sense of it. So, in this story, Russia waged a sophisticated and audacious operation to subvert American elections and install a president of its choice. It pulled off a coup. Now, tell that to your average American liberal, and you'll get a nod of recognition. Isn't that true? I would think that most people would at least get a nod of recognition. They wouldn't all agree necessarily 100%, but a nod of recognition. Now, tell it to your average Russian liberal, admittedly a much smaller category, and you'll get uproarious laughter. Russians know that their state lacks the competence to mount a sophisticated sabotage effort. Now this is making people groan, and you're all rolling your eyes and thinking, is Glenn Greenwald writing this? What's the story here? Hold on. Russians know that their state lacks the competence to mount a sophisticated sabotage effort, and that the Kremlin was even more surprised by Trump's election than was the candidate himself, and that Russian-American relations are at their most dysfunctional since the height of the Cold War. And yet, indictments keep coming. Now, this might not make immediate sense to the American liberal mind, but I guess if you keep in mind the frame that Russian-American relations, typically, we understand those things as government to government, officialdom to officialdom. And it's true that we, while Russian-American relations, I guess, are not dysfunctional in the sense that apparently our president will do whatever the Russian president tells him to do. But you need to abstract this from the level of officialdom and think of it differently. And this article presents us with the opportunity to do that. Reader Masha says, I think I've finally figured it out. I don't mean that I've figured out whether Russians influenced the outcome of the American election. I doubt even the Robert Mueller investigation will be able to answer that question. I mean that I've figured out how to think about what we know and not go crazy. The answer lies in the concept of the mafia state. And no, I'm not invoking the mob because Stone encouraged an associate to behave like a character from The Godfather Part 2 as detailed in his indictment. Think about this over the next 2 minutes. I think you probably see where this is going. It's explained very well. We'll continue with it and talk to Armando after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with the reading of this very interesting article. We'll bring Armando in for the purposes of having a live in-studio audience. Good morning, Armando. How are you doing? Let me continue with just a little bit, at least, of
Go ahead.
This piece, The Trump-Russia Investigation and the Mafia State by Masha Gessen. And when we left off, I think we're all, and we've had a little bit of background in this, in listening to the show over the past couple of months. Again, we'll just wind up that previous paragraph. The writer saying, I've figured out how to think about what we know and not go crazy. The answer lies in the concept of the mafia state. And no, this is not just because Roger Stone told somebody in the indictment, the latest indictment, to do a Frank Pantangeli in front of the Congressional Committee. As journalists who usually cover American politics have connected the dots of the story of Russian interference, and this is, again, being told from a Russian perspective. So as journalists who usually cover American politics have connected the dots of the story of Russian interference, those of us who normally write about Russia have cringed. Early on, it was common to point out that Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, who's now under arrest, worked for Viktor Yanukovych. We did point that out, yes. Who is often characterized as the pro-Russian president of Ukraine. That is what we typically hear, right? In fact, there was no love lost between Putin and Yanukovych. After he was run out of town during the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution, Yanukovych did seek refuge in Russia, but during his tenure as president, he was an unreliable partner for Putin at best. Perhaps more to the point, he's a crook and a brute. He served time for robbery and assault before he became a politician. Ah, interesting. And he's wanted in Ukraine, by the way, for treason, mass murder, and embezzlement. Okay, that does help spell things out. A visitor to Ukraine can take a tour of Yanukovych's palace, famous for its marble, crystal, immense scale, and a life-size solid gold sculpture of a loaf of bread. Who do you know who lives like that, by the way? Manafort made a career of working for the corrupt and the crooked. That in itself tells us little about Russia or its role in the 2016 campaign. We cringed at headlines that claimed to have established a connection between the Kremlin and Natalia Veselnitskaya. We also read those headlines, right? The lawyer who was at the Trump Tower meeting with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Manafort. Veselnitskaya represents a Russian company, Previzon Holdings Limited, which was investigated in New York for money laundering, and Veselnitskaya has been charged with lying to prosecutors about her working relationship with the Russian Prosecutor General's office. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York claim that Veselnitskaya collaborated with a lawyer in the Russian prosecutor's office to draft exculpatory documents for Previzon. In media coverage, her emailing with a lawyer in the Russian prosecutor's office was portrayed as evidence of a direct line to Putin, suggesting that she met with Trump's campaign officials as his emissary. To me, it read as a lot of bluster on the part of a minor operator. From all the available evidence, and contrary to her sales pitch, Veselnitskaya did not have any dirt to offer on Hillary Clinton. To the extent that Veselnitskaya had established connections to high-level Russian officials, they were the kind that are necessary for a lawyer in Russia to be at all effective in a corrupt system. That sounds fairly plausible to me, actually, even though I had no difficulty believing, Veselnitskaya has connections in the high levels of the Russian prosecutor's office. That makes some sense. Maybe that's the connection to Putin. Next up, we cringed at the characterization of the Russian online influence campaign as sophisticated and vast. Russian reporting on the matter, the best available, according to our writer here, convincingly portrayed the troll operation as a small-time and ridiculous affair. It was, it seems, fraudulent in every way imaginable. It perpetrated fraud on American social networks, creating fake accounts and events and spreading falsehoods. But it was also fraudulent in its relationship to whoever was funding it, because surely crudely designed pictures depicting Hillary Clinton as Satan could not deliver anyone's money's worth. And they have a point there, too. I mean, this stuff was pretty simplistic and stupid, but, it doesn't take much to move American voters, some of whom are rather simplistic and stupid, I guess. But it's a good point. It wasn't really like the most sophisticated operation. It was pretty obvious. So, one more continuing paragraph here. What we're observing is not most accurately described as the subversion of American democracy by a hostile power. Instead, it is an attempt at state capture by an international crime syndicate, which, by the way, is just as bad. But it is a different way of looking at it. Again, not subversion of American democracy by a hostile power so much as an attempt at state capture by an international crime syndicate. What unites Yanukovych, Veselnitskaya, Manafort, Stone, WikiLeaks' Julian Assange, the Russian troll factory, the Trump campaign staffer George Papadopoulos and his partners in crime, the professor whose academic credentials are in doubt, and the female Russian national, referred to in some other parts of the case, who appears to have fraudulently presented herself as Putin's niece, is that they're all crooks and frauds. Okay, that doesn't help us too much, but it's true. This is not a moral assessment or an attempt to downplay their importance. It is an attempt to stop talking in terms of states and geopolitics and begin looking at mafias and profits. And this is something we all know about and can understand too. The Hungarian sociologist Balint Magyar, who probably none of us understand, who created the concept of the post-communist mafia state, has just finished editing a new collection of articles called Stubborn Structures, Reconceptualizing Post-Communist Regimes. In one of his own pieces in the collection, using Russia as an example, Magyar describes the mafia state as one run by a patron and his, quote, court. Put another way, the boss and his clan, or we would say family, I suppose, who appropriate public resources and the institutions of the state for their private use and profit. When I talked to Magyar on the phone on Monday, he told me that Trump is, quote, like a mafia boss without a mafia. Trump cannot transform the United States into a mafia state, of course, but he still acts like a mafia boss. Except he's not really a boss. He's just, an underboss at best. He's able to run his own.
He has a little crew.
Right.
He has a crew.
Yes, I think we would all probably characterize it the same way. I mean, Putin has real power at his fingertips. Trump should, as president of the United States, have that power at his fingertips, but not for obviously corrupt purposes. It's not true that everyone
doesn't work that way.
Right.
That's why.
Yes, and that's thankfully what's there to prevent him. He has run the Trump organization, which does work that way in that fashion. That's something he was able to manipulate. But that's a vastly different. It's not even a big company, much less a company that has anything to do with the scale of the United States.
He was taken in by the Putin crime family.
Yes, it's subsumed by it. There's not a partnership. It's just there was a business opportunity that the Putin family offered the Trump family, and the Trump family took it. And they're beholden to him to the extent that they want to continue to rake in that money and possibly not be killed.
If you remember The Sopranos, Tony had answered to some guy in New York. Mm-hmm. But he was sort of his own crew, but he called it a family. But the reality is his real boss was that guy in New York. So
that's
Trump's real boss is in Moscow.
A good parallel there. All right. Let's see. So Putin, on the other hand, he continues, is a mafia boss with a real mafia, which has turned the whole state into a criminal state. Still, he said, the behavior at the top is the same. Let's see. There is just a bit more with this, but did you want to break in with something?
No, my stuff will take 10 minutes.
All right. So well, let's continue on, because I think this is pretty interesting. The mafia state is efficient in its own way. It does not take over all state institutions, but absorbs only the ones necessary for extracting profit. I'm sure it's always looking for ways to extract profit from what it hasn't taken, too. But when it figures it out, it'll take over that as well. Some structures, therefore, continue to work as though they were part of a normal state. This may explain why we saw the official Russian foreign policy establishment preparing, in the lead up to the 2016 election, for a working relationship with the presumed Hillary Clinton administration. When we think about a normal state, Magyar told me, the assumption is that a state acts in the public interest. And if that doesn't happen, that's a deviation. That is true of how we think about democracies, but also to a large extent of how we think about dictatorships as well. The dictator positions himself as the arbiter and sole representative of the national interest. A mafia state, on the other hand, acts only in the personal profit-seeking interests of the clan. That's not a deviation, Magyar said. It's a substantive structural characteristic of the state. The state itself, at the top, works as a criminal organization. When members of the American media cover the story of Russian meddling, they implicitly portray Russia as a normal state. And I guess remember this lesson when we talk about Saudi Arabia. And the influence operation as an undertaking of the state aimed at furthering Russia's national interests. This strikes Russians as absurd. By the measure of national interest, the Trump presidency has been disappointing for Russia. Most of what Trump has given the Russian state has come through inaction. He's barely reacted to continued Russian aggression in Ukraine. He's failed to support NATO. And he has said that the U.S. will withdraw from Syria, although it looks like the withdrawal is unlikely to be fast or total. At the same time, diplomatic relations between Russia and the U.S. have deteriorated to the point of near total dysfunction, and despite considerable foot-dragging by the White House, the U.S. has continued to impose new sanctions on Russia. By the metrics of a mafia state, though, the Trump presidency has yielded great results for Russia. A mafia boss craves respect, loyalty, and perceived power. Trump's deference to Putin and the widespread public perception of Putin's influence over Trump have lifted Putin's stature beyond what I suspect could have been his wildest dreams. As happens in a mafia state, most of the benefit accrues to the patron personally, but some of the profit goes to the clan. Over the weekend, we learned that the Treasury Department has lifted sanctions on companies that belong to Oleg Deripaska, a member of Putin's court, who once lent millions of dollars to Manafort. If a ragtag team employed by or otherwise connected to the Russian mafia state tried to aid a similar collection of crooks and frauds to elect Trump, as it increasingly looks like they did, then the Deripaska news helps explain their motivations. The story is not that Putin is masterminding a vast and brilliant attack on Western democracy, although it happens to end up looking an awful lot like that, I would add. The story, it appears, is that the Russian mafia state is cultivating profit-yielding relationships with the aspiring mafia boss of the U.S. and his band of crooks, subverting democratic institutions in the process. Either way, we're kind of screwed. But I think that's a very interesting construct and probably very productive construct for figuring out exactly what's going on. I think there's a lot of lessons in it for learning about what's going on in Saudi-owned Arabia, which was never really a modern state in any sense, though we gave it all the trappings of one, including a seat in the UN and a flag and everything, and speak of people as being Saudi nationals, even though Saudi is a descriptor of the family that owns the land that they happen to live on. It's a giant private compound masquerading as a country, and if you can can figure out that concept, can you figure out, it's not a great leap to a mafia crime structure that happens to have, among its scams, grabbed the reins of Russian governmental officialdom. And when they say that U.S.-Russian diplomacy is in a shambles, and yet there's this close cooperation between Putin and Trump, it still makes sense. Russian diplomats, typically speaking, I mean, those who have been career diplomats, have little or nothing to do with the mafia side of things. So long as they stay in line and don't say anything that gets them in trouble, they can continue to collect their paycheck and live the diplomatic lifestyle, which is mostly lived outside of Russia, so that's good for them. And they can live a relatively decent life outside of Russia and not really very often have to answer directly to Putin for anything. But those guys are totally frustrated in whatever purpose remains for them in their state. One, because they can't direct foreign policy, and two, because there isn't anyone of any competence to talk to on the American side. Not only because we're headed by a clown, but because the clown has installed other crime lord clowns as our American diplomats. There's nothing to talk about. The structure remains, but there's no such thing as American-Russian diplomatic relations. There's just the relationship between Putin and Trump. So the structure remains. There's just nothing for them to do and no purpose to their efforts. So you can see how that happens. I don't know. I found this to be an amazing explanation of the construct, and I think something useful for understanding things going forward. I definitely wanted to get that one on the record. In the meantime... Yes.
Now I do have a segue into what I wanted to talk about.
Excellent. I'm glad we
14 minutes, which is just about the time it'll take. A little
Perfect.
less.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Everything you just talked about.
Okay. Everything that guy just said is, yeah, okay.
No, everything you just talked about, plus everything you just told us about Marcy and Mueller and yada, yada, yada.
Okay.
Bob Barr is going to be the next Attorney General.
So they say.
And he submitted written answers where he's already hedging on what he's going to release.
Okay, that's not good.
Robert Mueller, and we all agree that they're going to go by the Justice Department guidance that you can't indict Robert Mueller. And then, well, if you're not indicting him, you can't talk bad about him. That's exactly what Comey did, and that was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mueller's not going to answer these questions publicly for us. And I want to make this point because I think the House of Representatives has actually not done a good job in the first month on this.
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't been a single public hearing.
Yeah.
Not one. They should not be deferring to Mueller on Michael Cohen. No. You show up, you subpoena, you answer my questions. I don't care what Rob Mueller has to say. Rob Mueller's not going to solve my problems.
That may be true.
Who is he going to indict on the collusion conspiracy thing? He's not going to indict anybody. If he had a report that was going to tell the story and blah, 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 that'd be nice. But I'm more convinced than ever that that's going to be some expert, some completely redacted half-life stuff where, we can't say these bad things about anybody. The House of Representatives, controlled by Democrats, people I admire like Elijah Cummings and Adam Schiff and Maxine Waters, needs to get off its butt and start doing public hearings now.
I would agree.
We're not going to be able to live by the leak out of the Intelligence Committee. We need public hearings. We need them now. You can call them oversight. I don't care if you call them impeachment. I don't care what you call them. What is the House of Representatives doing, David? It's been a month.
Yes. Well, they were consumed, of course, with the shutdown for most of
now
that.
What?
And it's going to come back. And maybe that's as much what drives Trump's interest in the shutdown as the wall. The longer we consume the Democrats' time with the shutdown, the less time they have to spend on the investigations that would probably hang us. I guess we're going to have to learn to walk and chew that particular gum at the same time, especially if they're going to, if people are going to be right in complaining that the government is shut down and workers aren't being paid, but, Congress, they're getting their salary. Well, okay. What if they were getting their salary for holding these hearings and investigations? People would complain that we weren't working hard enough to reopen the government, but, say, well, we just want to make sure that there's a government left to open at this point by having these investigations. What's the point of opening the crime syndicate for business?
All right. So you're saying I'm being impatient and I should give them a little more time.
No. I think you're right. They were easily distracted at the beginning, and then remember, a lot of them are new to this, and even the people who aren't new to being in the majority are new to having to organize this majority. I could forgive their delay the first time, but if the government shuts down again, they can't be entirely consumed with that and ignore the investigations that you're calling for. These have to happen, and the sooner they happen, the better the chance that we can actually do something about at least some part of this before they start panicking about the next upcoming elections and insist that we drop it all.
Right. That's the whole point. Is this a crisis? Is Trump the threat that I think he is? I know you think he is. This needs it needs to start, and it needs to start publicly. Mm-hmm. Don't get this isn't summer of '73. This is if Nixon and Watergate came out summer of '75 and he was going to run for re-election in '76, we would. You would not want to just take your time and look at that. No, there'd be urgency. I don't see that urgency.
Yeah, well, there have been a couple of stumbling blocks in the way, not all of which I agree should have had as much influence as they did. I have a couple of tweets here, actually, from D. Allen, who tweets as "Last Fish Eaten." I love giving out people's crazy names. But saying that, reminding us that, for instance, the complaint was that the House Intelligence Committee apparently felt that they couldn't meet because the Republicans to the committee had not yet been named. Now they have been named now in the last day or so, and I think that they finally came forward with those names because I think they finally figured out on the Democratic side and said so. Hey, you know what? We don't have to actually wait for the Republicans in this, which is what that was my position all along. It may just be that it's all a coincidence and the Republicans were ready to name them anyway. They just lost the paperwork. I don't know what their excuse is, but it was pretty obvious to me. I thought there's really nothing in the House rules or the non-existent at this point House Intelligence Committee rules that says that you need any Republican presence at a meeting to conduct business. It's just that's been the Intelligence Committee rules in the past, but they aren't the rules now. And it was
something
only
like complete hokum to me. Change the ruling. You got the votes. If they don't show up, to hell with them.
Yeah. That's the way they should have done it. I think it was that Schiff and others thought that it would be most prudent to proceed under the allegedly previously existing Intelligence Committee rules that may have required a minority presence. But, the problem with Nunes was that he randomly and recklessly would deviate from those rules anyway, so who cares?
And, if someone's taking that long to name their their members. That's on them. It's
Yeah,
not on you.
right. No, I mean, we went through the same thing on the Senate side a couple of years ago when Democrats took the majority again, and the Republicans were saying that they were going to filibuster the organizing resolution. They were going to prevent people from getting their committee assignments because they wanted to fight over the balance, the partisan balance on the committees. They felt they weren't getting adequate representation commensurate with the share of total seats in the Senate that they held, and there was a big to-do, a big worry about that. What are we going to do? We're not going to be able to constitute our committees. And I wrote on both at Daily Kos and I think maybe at that point at Congress Matters and to, privately in emails, let them do it. You should help them filibuster the organizing resolution. And the Senate, being a continuing body, people who have their committee assignments will continue to have them. Yes, the Democratic members of the newly elected class that just won the election, the 1/3 of the Senate, won't be able to get new committee assignments. But if you look at the lineup of Democrats and Republicans waiting for committee assignments and the lineup of Democrats and Republicans that would continue on their current committee assignments, none of the rules of those committees forbid them from meeting so long as there's a majority, and there's a majority on all of them. And they almost all have now overwhelmingly Democratic majorities. Let them filibuster it, and every piece of legislation you could possibly ever want will sail through committee and be ready for floor consideration by the time they realize what they've done. This isn't what we wanted to talk about, though. I apologize. And now I realize
no, it's important because there's going to be a lot of excuse making. We
Yes.
actually understand that their excuses are nonsense.
They sometimes are, yeah. And it's not a new thing that they either convince themselves that something they want to do is necessary, or that bloggers can't possibly understand the rules the way I do. But
who's the fellow who doesn't want to do the subpoenaing? Richard Neal, who doesn't want to subpoena Trump's tax returns.
I guess he wants to be forced into that somehow.
Yeah, what is that?
I don't know.
We should treat this as a basic. I said, there's a guy, he's president of the United States. When he ran, he should have been releasing them.
Yeah.
As president, every president has always voluntarily released them. He's clearly not going to. What are you waiting for?
It's a good question.
Subpoena the tax returns now, today.
I wonder whether he's sitting there saying, well, with everything, I worry about what will happen when there's a Democratic president and a Republican majority.
Democratic president will have released his tax returns voluntarily already.
Yeah, right. Well, they'll make someone, they'll release mine, Well, they might, but do your taxes right. I don't know. I don't know why that. I mean, I guess they, like I said, they want to be forced into it. So let's yell. That's what we do. If we yell, they'll feel for. Maybe they really are willing to do it. And if Armando yells enough, and we agree,
obviously my yelling isn't going to change it.
Well,
but it gives me a little stress relief.
Yeah,
because I get to yell on the radio about it because it's killing me. What are they doing?
And they may result in something like, who knows, petitions or public calls from other people with larger platforms to say, yeah, get on it already. I don't know how much they're going to solve with those tax returns, but people have been clamoring for them for whatever reason. So, yeah, let's
see what's in them. Then we'll know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why would the Ways and Means Committee have this power if it wasn't meant for things like this?
I don't know what he's worried about. But they do have the power, and it's a legislative power. I think they would have had the power anyway.
Yeah.
There's no limit to the Congress's subpoena power, but there's a provision in a law that says it. So what are we talking about?
Doesn't mean you have to release them publicly. It just means you got to get them and figure out if there's anything that deserves to be released publicly.
Right. Fair enough. At least you go look at them and tell me what you think I should be able to see. That's why you're the Congress.
There's members of the Senate over there complaining. Yeah.
As I told you, it wasn't a long segment. It's just
okay.
There are all these issues that you've identified. And everyone seems to think Robert Mueller's going to straighten it all out. And I'm telling you, I don't believe that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think you're probably right. And I think it may be bigger than he's able to straighten out. And some of this is clearly the province of the Congress to figure out. There's nothing about well, I mean, I'm sure Mueller could make the case for needing or being interested in the tax returns, but, you know, why make him do that work? There's other work we want him to be doing. You can do this work. Help him out. So I think you're right. Okay, you made a great point. And, of course, it's time for us to now let Justice make his points instead of us. Yeah. But thank you for sitting by.
Thanks for giving me the unwind.
That's what you needed. Okay. Okay. All right. Take care.
Right. Talk to you later.
All right. Very good. I hope the rest of you also enjoyed that very interesting New Yorker piece. I think that helps clear things up and make sense of a few things that otherwise did not. So think about that, and I like I said, I think that there are lessons that can also be applied to a number of other countries in slightly modified form. But it helps us think about Russia, what they're doing, and helps us even reconcile Trump-Russia doubters' thoughts about this stuff with our own, even if you're totally convinced by it. Okay, time now to turn things over to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next. Let's see. I see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Howard Schultz named both in the summaries here. Exciting
From
stuff.
Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
It looks like a good one. You're going to like it. Venture capitalist and entrepreneur Nick Hanauer says Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the centrist, not Howard Schultz. Trump cabinet members are doing all they can to avoid questions from Congress, and Congress is doing all they can to help them avoid answering those questions too, as Armando just told you. All that and much more next. Stay tuned.